Hello, everybody. My name is Vito. I'm joined here today by Kevin. Very excited to be here. We're going to do some Apex JavaScript today. So a bit about who I am. I'm Vito. I started 2 years ago with working here at United Codes. I created some plugins. They're called PDF Region Pro and Flowforms. And together with Kevin Thyssen, I am a co-creator of the AMS, the Apex Message Service product that we have. Kevin, you want to go and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Kevin Thyssen. I've been at United Codes for about 4 years now. I'm a senior Apex developer, and today we're going to talk about JavaScript in Apex. So we'll do a little introduction. We'll have a demo as well, and hopefully this will be your first steps of becoming a JavaScript Jedi in Apex. So let's get started.
Really quickly as well, if there are any questions, it's a live stream. Let's make it interactive. Make sure you ask your questions, and we'll be here to answer them live for you. So Kevin, let's go to the presentation.
All right, thanks. So, becoming a JavaScript Jedi in Apex. Even if you're not writing custom JavaScript code, if you're using Apex applications, JavaScript is everywhere. If you're using certain page items like color pickers or date pickers, components like interactive reports, interactive grids, it's actually a lot of JavaScript code which is executed in the backend. Apex also uses external libraries like jQuery or Oracle Jet for charts. And also, if you use dynamic actions in your pages or applications, that is powered by JavaScript as well. So JavaScript is a very important component of every Apex application. There's a whole JavaScript API available within Apex, and the link you need to remember is apex.oracle.com/JSAPI. It contains all the functionalities which are available for JavaScript in Apex. So we have namespaces, different interfaces, things you could use for debugging, events, notifications. There's a pretty extensive API. So everything you would need or you need to look up is available at this URL. So why would you need to use JavaScript in your applications? There's a lot of things we can do natively. So there's not really a need to use JavaScript just because you like it. I would really say use JavaScript wisely. So to extend functionality, things that aren't available within Apex natively, or enhance your user experience. And we'll see an example of this right away in a demo application. Now, where can we add value with JavaScript code? For example, we can do client-side validations. So, for example, input validations, or trigger input fields dynamically, so show and hide them, or moving content around dynamically whenever the user makes a certain selection, for example. A very important part is we can do asynchronous updates of the page, so without the page being submitted. This is a great advantage, especially for pages with a lot of functionality. If you have different actions going on at your page, you don't want to necessarily submit each and every time because your page will be rendered again, data is loaded again, and most of the time this isn't too great for user experience. So we can avoid that problem by using JavaScript and asynchronous updates. We could also add additional functionality, for example, tooltips. Those aren't available natively in Apex at the moment. So we could load an additional library for it, providing this functionality. So how can we add JavaScript to an Apex application? There are a couple of ways. So first of all, and most used, I would say, is the JavaScript section in the page designer. So we can load a URL, some script that we have, or we can define functions and global variables ourselves. So this is the most common way to add JavaScript to your page. Of course, we can also execute JavaScript code inside of a dynamic action. We have a lot of options in dynamic actions. One is to execute JavaScript code. So this is where we can write our code as well. We can also include JavaScript code in static application files or workspace files. So as we will see later, this is a great way to scale your code, actually, because every function or variable or functionality that you define within static application or workspace files will be available throughout your application or even your entire workspace. So you can reuse specific functionality across applications or across pages if you like it. If you define or if you put certain files in static application files, if you export your application, your JavaScript code will be included. If you put your file into workspace files, you have to copy it manually whenever you would export applications and you need those files. But with workspace files, you can use your code across applications as well. So that might be pretty convenient. We also have the user interface attributes. There we can reference JavaScript files as well. That's another option. And there's also an Apex JavaScript PL/SQL API, less common, I would say. Usually it's used for plugin development. So we can load external files needed for our plugins. And we also have component attributes, which can contain small JavaScript code snippets. For example, they can be used for configurations of interactive grids, special functionality in charts, for example. So that code needs to be initialized in the component attributes. A best practice, if you have JavaScript code on one page, and you only need it on one page, you can just declare it at page level. That's no issue. But the moment you start copying the code to other pages and using it in different locations, a best advice would be to create a file and reference it. Because making a copy of your code one time doesn't seem like that big of a problem. But most of the time, and certainly in larger projects, that code is copied more than 2 times or 3 times or 10 times even. And before you know it, you have to make a change somewhere. And then you have to go through all those pages to modify your JavaScript code. So I would say if you have more than 2 pages, just create a file and then make a reference of it. So you would only need to adapt your code in one place when you need to make a change. We will see an example of that later also, but make sure that if you are executing certain JavaScript code, which triggers a backend process, that you do a check on authorization. That's important because JavaScript code can be executed through the console window of your browser. So even if you would not expect users to do it, sometimes they can still do it. So bear that in mind. Also, try to avoid the JavaScript protocol and URLs. We will see in the demo why that is important too. Okay, so let me tell you something about debugging. If you have JavaScript code in your applications and you want to debug, our most common tool would be the browser console. It's available in every browser, and you can log messages to that console or variable values which appear then in that console. We can always set breakpoints. You can just add debugger to your code, and whenever you have the console open while running your application, the code will stop, and then you will be able to inspect the status of or the value of different variables within your JavaScript code. So it's a very convenient way to debug. Of course, there's also the Apex Debug JavaScript API. So you can include, just as we would with the console.log function, we can always include apex.debug, and then you have different levels. So you have info level, error level, there are a few others. So if you have enabled debug for your application, everything you put in the Apex Debug API will be rendered in the console as well. Okay, time for a demo. So what we will do in this demo is we'll, of course, integrate some JavaScript functionality into an existing application. We will see how you can make your code scalable. So we'll go from a component that is on one page to code that we can use on different applications or different pages. And we'll also use JavaScript to enhance the user experience. Okay, so let me switch. All right, so I have an application here. First, we don't really have some custom JavaScript code. Let me see how that works. I just have one report, one interactive report actually. And the way this page is working or this report is working is that you can select a few checkboxes and then activate or inactivate records. Nothing really special. There's not a lot of functionality here. The way I set this up, let's go to the page source. So I have my interactive report. It's just a query, nothing special. The only thing I did was I added some HTML code for the checkboxes, because normally if you have an interactive report, one of the first questions you get from customers is saying, okay, I want to be able to select a few records. So I want checkboxes. So this is how we can do it. The name is F01, so that creates an array when we submit the page, and those IDs, so in this case it's character ID, we can use those IDs to process the rows when the page gets submitted. So I have two buttons, they both submit the page, and here we can see the two processes. We have activate and inactivate, which basically loops through the array and update the status, in this case yes or no, accordingly. The problem is here, when I select a few records and I paginate, I go back to the first page and my selection is gone. So this is actually a first issue that we can address by including JavaScript in our pages. Now, let me show you quickly the two components, because the story gets a little different when we have two components on our page. I can do the same thing here. I can say, okay, I want those two records. I want them inactivated, but the page gets submitted, and it means if I have made a selection here, and I select those two records here, activate them, also the selection of the first report is gone. So from a user experience point of view, this might not be the best thing. Also, if we take a look at the page, I have two buttons here for each report. And I have 4 processes. So yeah, this is a little bit of duplication in this case, I would say. So given this page, how can we approve the user experience? So by not submitting the page, and how we can make sure that if we select a checkbox here and we paginate, that this selection is being kept active. So that's where we can use some JavaScript. So we'll first start very easy with just one component. So I have the same report. I can make a selection, and whenever I paginate, go back, the selection stays active. How can we do that? Let's take a look. So I will go to the page, and I have 2 dynamic actions. So we will execute some JavaScript code whenever we check a checkbox, and then after the report is being refreshed, so it means after we paginate, the selected IDs that we have from the report will be checked again. So first of all, I have a variable, a local variable, which is an array called characters, and that will be used to store the IDs coming from the checkboxes. So if we then go to dynamic actions, if I toggle a character, what is happening? So first, we have the checkbox, and if the checkbox is checked, we basically push that ID of the character to our characters array. So this is a characters array, and we can also, I'm also added the debug line here, so we can see it in the console when enabled. So let's do that. I will enable debug. Open up the console. So now if I'm selecting records, see if I'm on the right page. Yeah. Normally it, oh yeah, I was in the wrong window, I guess. Yeah. So we can see if nothing is selected, the characters array is empty. If I make selections here, you can see that the characters array is being built up. So basically this dynamic action, it either adds or removes a selected ID from my array. It's very simple actually. Then if we refresh or paginate the report, all I'm going to do is looping over each checkbox, and if the ID of that that specific record is part of my characters array, I will check that checkbox. So that is a way to keep those records selected even after pagination. So these are 2 pretty simple dynamic actions, which improves, in this case, our user experience. we have one page now. We can also adapt our code a little bit to make it work with two components. Because if I have two reports on one page, and if I'm selecting them, I need to make sure that I know the IDs of each report, because report 1 can have an ID of 1, and report 2, in this case, the ships, they can also have an ID of 2. So I need to make sure that I have two arrays, basically. So we can adapt our code a little bit to make this work. Let's have a look. By the way, the data that you're seeing here is, of course, Star Wars related. It's not mine. It's coming from ChatGPT. So if anyone sees anything that is not 100% correct, that is not my fault. Okay, so let's take a look at the page. So we had this character array before, and now I'm defining a variable called selected IDs, and it's an object. So it's a little bit different because this object will actually contain two arrays, one for my first report and one array for my second report. Okay, so I have the same two dynamic actions as I had before. The code is a little bit different. So I'm also requesting the report ID, and that is something I need to tell you in advance. So on the checkbox, I've added a little extra ID called data report ID, which in this case says characters. For the second report, it says ships, because we need to know if we have multiple reports on the page, which IDs, from which report the IDs are coming. So that is something we can also read through JavaScript. So if we go back to our dynamic action, so I have the value of the checkbox, I have the report ID, and then we're gonna create an array, if it does not exist yet, for that specific report ID. So we'll have selected IDs characters, for example, and then we will push the value of that specific checkbox into one of both arrays. If we deselect the checkbox, then we, of course, will remove it from that array. And this, the Apex item code, is just to update the value of the page items, which you see here above the reports. So these are dynamic as well. So we can see that it's empty now, and the values, they're being kept up to date. So with adapting our code slightly, we can address the same functionality, not for one, but for two components, actually. The same works for the checkbox state. So after the report is being refreshed, when we paginate, for example, we're just gonna search for the report ID, in this case, or the characters or the ships. We get the IDs, and then if the IDs are in the array, then we will check the checkbox. So
hi, Kevin.
Yes?
Yeah, there is a question from somebody on LinkedIn. The question is, do the variables work over a modal or a dialog window? So for instance, when you have one report on a main page and then another report on a dialog window.
Well, in this case, they don't, because we've only defined the variables on a page level. So we've defined the variable here, which means that this variable will only be available on this page. But actually, that's a very good question, because that is our next page. So what can we do if we want the same functionality over different pages in our applications? So then we should use a function. And we see here two reports. I can select a few records. I can paginate. In the pagination, after pagination, the IDs, they stay the same. The checkboxes get selected. Now, how did we do this? You can see instead of defining a variable on page level, I'm referencing a file, which is stored in my static application files. So let's have a look. If I go to static application files, I have my JavaScript code here. So this is basically the same code that existed in my two dynamic actions before on the first 2 pages, but I've brought them together in a namespace. So this variable name, JS Jedi, it's a namespace. And why is it important to have a namespace? It means that your code is contained within this namespace. So Apex has the same. If you reference JavaScript code from Apex, you always have to use apex.item, for example, or debug, or whatever JavaScript API you want to use. So a namespace makes sure that your JavaScript code does not interfere with already existing function names or other variable names which are used in your application. So it would be a way to go, actually, certainly for bigger applications to use namespaces. So, and here's actually the example of the question that we just got. So I'm defining the selected IDs object here. So it is available in my namespace. And this, because this code is inside a function, this will be available also across multiple pages, if you like. So this is just some JavaScript code to dismiss a notification. So we don't really, it's not really of interest here. Okay, so we have these selected IDs, and then we have the toggle checkbox and the set checkboxes functions. So 2 functions, and actually they basically do the same thing as we saw earlier. So if a checkbox is selected, we will assign them to the report ID, one of the 2 reports. If a checkbox is deselected, we'll just remove that ID from the array. And then set checkboxes will, this function will be executed whenever our report is being refreshed. So if we take a look at the page again.
Hi, Kevin.
Yes.
Somebody on LinkedIn asked again, can you define these JavaScript functions and namespaces on the global page so that you don't have to include them on the pages themselves?
That's a good question. So can I include them on global page? I don't think there is a section for JavaScript here. You could use a dynamic action on page load in which you would execute JavaScript code, but I don't think that is the best way. I would reference files then in your through your theme. So one of the slides I had, and let me go back very quickly. One of the slides that I had was integrating JavaScript code. So you can integrate it in a dynamic action, static application files, but also in your user interface attributes. And if you define your JavaScript file here, then it will be included in every page of your application. So that would be my recommendation to do it. Okay, so let's go back to our page with our function. So I've told earlier that we're just including one file now. And then we have these 2 dynamic actions again. But instead of writing a lot of or more JavaScript code here, I can just reference a function. So this function, the toggle checkbox function, this is coming from our JavaScript script that we included in static application files. So, and we can use this line in each and every page in which we would use, we would like to use this functionality. So the JavaScript code is declared on one location, basically. It's defined somewhere, and we can just reference it anywhere we want. The same for the, after refresh, we will just reference the set checkboxes function here within our namespace that we created. So JS Jedi dot set checkboxes, and it will execute that function. So whenever we need to make a change to that function, for example, we can do it in one place, and everywhere where this reference has been placed, that new code is going to be that change is gonna be there as well. So that's actually, yeah, a very convenient way to scale your JavaScript code across multiple pages of your application, or even multiple applications as well. So now we don't have the activate or inactivate buttons here, but we haven't addressed the problem of submitting the page. And that is our second or our next step, basically. So I can make a selection here. I can make a selection there as well. I can say inactivate. So these two records are inactivated. And because the page is not submitted in this case, my selection of the second report stays intact. Okay, how can we do this? Let's have a look. So this is using server processing, and it's part of the Apex JavaScript API. So what we can define is a function, a JavaScript function called activate, inactivate in this case, and it has 3 parameters. So we need to report, we need activate, and it will be yes or no, so to activate or deactivate, and we need the IDs, so every checkbox that has been selected, basically. And with these 3 parameters, we can invoke a server process, and you see the reference of the JavaScript API, which Apex provides here, apex.server.process. And activate, inactivate is actually a PL SQL procedure that we will execute. So we'll first have a look there, and then we come back to this code. So the way server processes are defined is in the processing tab. And normally you would have, if you submit the page, you would have a few procedures or updates or deletes or whatever your code needs to do. It's here in the processing tab. But you can define an AJAX callback here. So in this case, I've called it activate, inactivate. And it basically executes a piece of PL SQL code. So we'll have 3 variables here, which are coming from our JavaScript function. And then basically I will see if the report is characters, then I will update my table. I will set the status to active or inactive for whatever ID is in the array. And I will do the same for ships. It's important to know that if we're using a server process, we have to return JSON. So if everything goes according to plan, we have a JSON object here with a status and a message. In case we get an error, then I'm just saying that something went wrong. So whenever this process is executed, and let's go back to our function call. So whenever our process is executed with these 3 values or parameters, when it's done, we get the data back. And the data in this case is actually the JSON that is being returned from the server process. So we can check the status if the status is success, then we'll show the success message defined in the server process, and we will refresh that report. If something went wrong, we'll just show the error. So this is the way a server process works, and you can use this without submitting your page. The way we can do this is, so you'll see those 4 buttons here, and what they do, so they all have a dynamic action here, and they all call the same JavaScript function. So the activate inactivate function will trigger the server process, and then we just have a few parameters that we pass on to the function. So in this case, it's activating the characters on the first report, but the ships will be the same. The only thing is that we will change the ID for the report. So by using different parameters, you can also reuse the same code without making too many changes. So yeah, that's basically how this page works. Server processes, in my opinion, can have a lot of added value whenever the page gets a little bit more complicated or you don't want to submit the page every time. All right. Then we'll have a look at the final page here. And you have to be a little bit careful. As I said during the introduction, sometimes JavaScript code, or most of the time, JavaScript code can be executed through the console. So you have to be aware of that. And what I mean by that is, so now we're doing things a little bit different here. When I logged in, I became part of the Rebel Alliance here. So I could also be a member of the Galactic Empire. It's just a random value that is set after my authentication. But anyway, you can see here that these are grayed out. So whenever there's a record here from the Galactic Empire, I'm not able to change it. I can't click on it. I can only activate or inactivate these records if I'm part of the same affiliation here, which has been set on login. So I can only change my own records, for example. Basically, that's what it says. Now, I don't know if you guys can see it, but if you hover over this link, you can actually see in the lower left corner that it uses JavaScript code, and it says toggle characters with a few variables. So if I click this, and if I click this again, I'm just using the ID and saying, okay, I want or to activate or to deactivate this record. So if I go to my console, let's clear this. So it's saying toggle characters, okay. Let me see, toggle characters, or toggle character. Maybe I can change another one. So this is number 20. That's this record here. And although I should not be able to change it, I can still do it through JavaScript. You have to be aware of that. It's also very easy to see what's going on because the link is actually provided, like the JavaScript server class is provided, and the function name is visible here. If we go to the page, we can actually see that here. So I have this link with some JavaScript code here, in which we can alter that record. Now, a better way to do this is if I have the second report. So I have the same functionality basically here, but you see that there's nothing visible when I hover here. So I can activate or inactivate these records, but nothing is really happening. Now the way we do this is actually we're not using the JavaScript code as a link, but we are using a jQuery selector here. So this is a little bit more difficult for a user to grasp or to guess what's going on. But still, some users, they're not stupid. So if in the first report, we have a function that said, okay, we can toggle characters. This report is about ships. So maybe there will be a function like toggle ship, right? And it's here. It has the same parameters. So I can toggle a ship. Let's try to activate or inactivate the ship with ID number 3. Okay, that's this one. It's from the Galactic Empire, so we are not allowed to alter that record in this case. And we get an error saying we are on the wrong side of the force. So I prevented this action from happening. And how did I do that? Let's have a look. So whenever I toggle a character, I'm executing JavaScript code through a server process, but I'm just doing the update here. So there's no real check on which affiliation I'm being a part of. As to where, if I'm toggling ships, I can get the affiliation because I've stored it in an application item when I log on to the application. And I will check. Now, this is a very basic check, of course, but you get the point. So if my affiliation is the same as the one from the record, then I can do my update. If it's not, then I'm getting an error message. And you could also not give an error message, just don't do the update, because now the user knows they have done something wrong. So it's not really necessary, I would say. But be aware that people can make changes through JavaScript, even though you would not be expecting them. So that's why you always have to do server checks when you use JavaScript or server-side processing. Okay, so I think this concludes my demo for today. We saw how to scale your JavaScript code within the page itself, within different pages of your application or even different applications. And we've used server-side processing to improve user experience. So I hope this was, I hope you could learn something from this session and yeah, make these changes in your applications as well.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for this super interesting presentation. I'm definitely going to use some of them myself. I hope like the listeners also learned something today. I know I did. Thank you very much, Kevin, and may the force be with you. So if there are any questions, you can still ask them. You can also just contact us at live@unitedcodes.com. Also, if you have suggestions for a next United Codes Live, please let us know. And then if you guys like it, we will continue to do these. Thank you very much, everyone.